Alright, some of you did not get the full notes for the Katan massacre, so if we have already done that in your class, you can fast forward a little bit to FDR and Isolationism. But in terms of the Katan massacre, this occurs when the Soviet Union invades Poland. They are very harsh to the Polish people, taking many prisoners of war. And at one point, they have a mass execution of about 20,000 Polish people. And they buried all these individuals in a mass grave near the Katan forest. And this doesn't all come out until later. Basically, when questioned about where all of these POWs went, the Soviet Union is basically in denial and tries to say that they had allowed the prisoners to escape. But a couple of years later, the mass grave was found. And this just made the Soviet Union look really, really bad, and they actually didn't even take or accept responsibility for this incident until the 1990s, when the Soviet Union was about to collapse. So it's just kind of a public embarrassment for them. But the importance is that we see that it isn't really just Germany and Hitler that is treating some of these other nations and their civilians poorly. We talked about what the Japanese did to China, and now we talked about what the Soviet Union has done to Poland. Okay, we're now going to transition in a few important notes as to what is going on within the United States during these early steps in World War II. Obviously, there is a natural support that we have for Great Britain once they're involved in the war. Great Britain is the United States' longest serving ally. We also support France. We were allies together in World War I. There's a natural inclination to want to support Great Britain and the other allies during this war. However, FDR is very hesitant to push America into war. World War I did not leave good sentiments about global wars in the United States, and even though Americans feel for the British, they're not necessarily wanting to get involved in this war at this time. He did not want to act out and do anything as president that would be overt favoritism towards one side and somehow anger either the Germans or the Japanese. So he kind of wants to remain neutral. In effort to remain neutral and to remain appearing neutral, Congress is going to pass a series of laws called the Neutrality Acts. One of the Neutrality Act laws placed an immediate ban against all arms sales towards any country at war. An immediate ban of arms sales means, like any sort of weapons, like arms as in weapons, we would not sell or do business like trading weapons with any country who is at war. And England and France at this time are actually looking at us to sell them weapons, so that because they're actively fighting the war. But again, this is so we would come off as more neutral and remain out of the war and be very isolationist. Eventually, a revision to this law was made, allowing for the sale of arms on a cash and carry basis. Basically, what that means is that we would not bring them to Great Britain or France ourselves. British and French ships would have to come and physically pick up any of the goods, and they would have to pay for the sale of arms or for the arms in the full amount. Paid in full, no loans. So we're not going to allow them to borrow money. We're not going to let them borrow weapons. They will have to pay in full. And we're going to allow France and England to purchase weapons from us in this method for several years. Then, and we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail in class next week, but France will inevitably fall to German control. Completely. Germany will basically control almost all of France, and especially the French government in Paris. When that happens, the United States starts getting really, really nervous, because we don't want Great Britain to be alone. But if and when they would fall too, who does that leave to stop Hitler? So starting to make us very nervous. And this event, France falling to Germany, actually starts pulling some American public opinion towards getting involved in the war. So you kind of had half of the American population still remaining as isolationists, wanting to stay out of the conflict, and then half of the Americans are transitioning to being interventionists, wanting to go to war to defend Great Britain since France has now fallen. We're also going to move politically just to be getting a little bit more involved than we were with a strict Neutrality Act basis. So, what we see is the Selective Service Act is passed again, in which we basically institute a draft. Yet, this time is different because we are not yet at war. So we actually implement the Selective Service Act prior to the U.S. even being at war with Germany or with Japan or with Italy. And this is the first ever peacetime draft. First draft we have in U.S. history when there was not yet war in our country. The second thing we're going to kind of do that violates the Neutrality Acts is, as we see the war persisting and seeing Great Britain becoming more and more vulnerable, we do decide to allow them to purchase weapons on a lend-lease basis, in which they are basically, we're loaning the weapons to them, and they will, under the understanding they will pay for them after the war. So that obviously directly violates cash and carry, because we're allowing them to buy the weapons without actually paying for them in full. Okay, so you see some of the steps we're making towards getting involved in this war, but yet we're still not fully involved, and we're going to talk about that, how that transition continues over the next week. So please write down any questions you have, and I will see you all next week. Have a great weekend.